The Evolution of Dracula in the Vampire Myth Across Time, first published in 1897, epitomizes the anxieties of the late Victorian period, a time of moral rigidity, imperialistic ambition, and profound cultural change. Stoker's novel presents themes of duality, sexuality, class, and religion, using the vampire as a metaphor for the threats and contradictions facing Victorian society. Today, we will explore how Dracula and its central themes have been reinterpreted across 6 notable adaptations: Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror, 1922, Horror of Dracula, 1958, Bram Stoker's Dracula, 1992, Twilight, 2008, Hotel Transylvania, 2012, and Dracula Untold, 2014. Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror, was a film of the modern era. This German expressionist silent film was an unauthorized adaptation of Dracula by Bram Stoker. Released during the modernist era, it reflects the cultural fears of post-World War I, including xenophobia and the spread of disease. The vampire is renamed Count Orlok, portrayed as grotesque and rat-like. In terms of duality and evil, Count Orlok is an embodiment of pure evil, stripped of Dracula's seductive qualities. The duality of good versus evil is clear but lacks complexity, aligning with modernist objectivism. Religious contextualization is reflected through Ellen's sinless nature and sacrifice, which highlight subtle religious undertones, with sunlight replacing overtly Christian symbols such as the cross and holy water. In terms of women and sexuality, Ellen is depicted as virtuous and self-sacrificing, a stark contrast to seductive female victims in later adaptations. In terms of power, Orlok's power lies in his connection to disease and the plague. His vulnerability to sunlight marks a significant departure from Stoker's original text. Orlok's grotesque appearance and foreign origin emphasize xenophobia rather than aristocratic decadence. Horror of Dracula, 1958, reflects modernist ideas despite its publication in the postmodern era. This British Gothic film, directed by Terence Fisher, modernizes Dracula while maintaining its core Gothic elements. It reflects mid-20th century modernist explorations of sexuality. In terms of duality of evil, Christopher Lee's Dracula is both aristocratic and predatory, embodying a seductive yet menacing duality. The good versus evil dichotomy here remains central, with Van Helsing as a major rational moral force. In terms of religion, Christian symbols like crosses and holy water are prominent throughout the film and are especially used to combat Dracula. Women in this film are highly sexualized, with Lucy and Mina depicted as both victims and seductresses. Vampirism symbolizes repressed desires. Dracula's powers are enhanced through his charisma and menace, but sunlight remains a key vulnerability. In terms of class and aristocracy, Dracula's aristocratic nature reflects Victorian fears of upper-class decadence, but the focus shifts to personal menace rather than systematic critique. In the 1992 film Bram Stoker's Dracula, we see Dracula's perspective for the first time. The film blends Gothic horror and romance, embracing postmodern constructionism. It humanizes Dracula, presenting him as a tragic anti-hero. The stark moral dichotomy of earlier versions is replaced by a nuanced portrayal of Dracula as a sympathetic figure driven by love and loss. Religious imagery returns with prominence, as Dracula's origin ties to his renunciation of God after his wife's death. Sexuality is depicted in layered ways, from Mina's romantic seduction to Lucy's graphic victimization. Vampirism becomes a metaphor for forbidden desire. In terms of power and vulnerability, Dracula's supernatural abilities are extensive, but his tragic love story emphasizes his emotional vulnerability. Class differences in this film are explicitly discussed, contrasting Mina's middle-class morality with Lucy's aristocratic privilege. In the movie Twilight, vampirism is translated into a romantic fantasy and reimagines vampires for a young adult audience. It basically reflects postmodern humanism prioritizing personal morality over traditional dualities. Vampires are no longer villains, and Edward Cullen is a morally conscious figure navigating his humanity within society. Religious themes are nearly absent, reflecting a secular interpretation of vampirism. Belle's agency in choosing to embrace the vampire world marks a shift from victimization to empowerment, and vampires are nearly invulnerable and impossible to beat. With no religious or sunlight weaknesses, their powers include super speed and strength, reflecting their evolution into superheroes. In terms of class, the Cullens are shown to integrate into human society rather than representing aristocratic otherness. In Hotel Transylvania, we see a reversal of the good versus evil narrative. This animated family comedy reverses traditional vampire narratives, portraying Dracula as a protective father and an anti-hero. The duality of good versus evil is inverted. Humans are the initial antagonists, while monsters are relatable and kind. Religious motives are absent, with vampirism stripped of its sinister connotations. The focus shifts to family and relationships rather than sexuality, humanizing vampires further. Vampiric vulnerabilities like garlic and sunlight are comedic rather than threatening. In terms of class and aristocracy, Dracula's aristocracy is reinterpreted as comedic legery and is divorced from its Victorian critique. The last film we will discuss today is Dracula Untold. This action horror film constructs a historical origin story for Dracula. It blends postmodern humanism with a return to religious contextualization. Dracula's transformation is rooted in a moral dilemma, making him an anti-hero rather than a villain. In terms of religion, religious themes do return as Dracula grapples with his faith and ultimate redemption. Dracula's relationship with his wife is central, although it is unsexualized, and he focuses on family loyalty instead. Vampiric powers are extensive, but his moral conflict and dependence on blood make him vulnerable. Dracula's aristocracy ties to his role as a protector of his people, reframing his privilege as a burden. In conclusion, from Stoker's Dracula to modern adaptations, the vampire myth has undergone profound transformations. Each era reinterprets vampirism to reflect its unique cultural anxieties, whether it's Victorian xenophobia, modernist fears of contagion, or postmodern explorations of morality and inclusivity. These adaptations reveal how art evolves to suit the concerns and values of its time while sustaining the enduring appeal of the vampire myth.